This is the last part of tonight's program of the Opportunity Zones Meetup. We're going to have a panel discussion where we're going to talk and ask some questions, hard questions of Michael here, about the Avelon project and the Gravitas Fund. And you as the audience will also have an opportunity to ask questions as well and learn as much as we can learn here in this last segment of tonight's program. On the panel with me, obviously, is Michael Graham, who's the CEO of Sebastian Partners, who has put together the Avelon project that he just described and has created the Gravitas Fund 1 of potentially 5 funds or maybe more that he will be using to fund different parts of his project at different times in different ways. Mm-hmm. And right there's a bunch of questions that are already coming to mind on doing that. With me also on the other end of the table here is Mickey Willis. Mickey is the CEO of NetZero Colorado, public benefit corporation located in Fort Collins, Colorado. Mickey is working on his own large-scale, massive, wild and crazy idea, I guess we would call it, called the Sugar Beet District. It's about a 50-acre parcel that he wants to make a showcase for indoor ag within a live-work-play environment. And Mickey is going through a lot of the same questions and issues that Michael has in working with the Avelon project. So what I want to do in this segment is we're going to ask more questions from Mickey's standpoint and mine, and everyone else can join in and just try to make sure that we've covered as much as we can on this particular project. So I'm going to kick off with the first question, and Mickey and Michael, when you answer a question, when you speak, just pick up the microphone there, and so we'll get a good audio recording for the segment. 5 funds, what's that mean? How are the funds targeted? I mean, what kind of investors are you looking for? What are the funds going to be used for? How are you staging the timing of the funds?
Okay, well, it's a good question, and it's intricate. I'll try to be simple, but when you start with a large parcel, you can only develop so many acres at one time. You have seasonality issues with grading and sewer, and so we just started with the timeline of first approvals, and then maybe prior to that, grading the first half of the site. We've done a lot of work with water and sewer and lift stations in the city of Aurora in order to come up with these different phases. And so, by and large, not all of it is about the fund has a correlation to the phase, but most of it does, because each piece of real estate has a life unto its own. If I didn't have to sell the residential parcels off, I'd keep them. But if you look at the overall metric of trying to develop 300 acres and what you'd put on that, it probably wouldn't happen in my lifetime. So we carved it out where there was economic benefit, there was handsome profits, and the overall thing to me, Karl and Mick, is if I wouldn't develop this and do this and put my own money in, which I have, on its own without an OZ benefit, I don't want to look at those deals, because to me the deals have to stand on their own.
Sure. So what's the timing on the funds? When do you expect your second, third, fourth, and fifth fund to roll out?
Well, I expect the first and second to, first one is available now. The second one will be available by the end of March, and the rest will be market-driven, contingent upon tenants signing leases, separate deals I'm working out with Aurora, and we're not speculative building. We're building with tenants only.
So yeah, this demonstrates how a project this scale has a level of complexity that boggles the imagination, because you've got all these different factors that you're trying to deal with so you don't get too far ahead. Mm-hmm. And you're watching the opportunity zone clock ticking in the background knowing that your maximum opportunity is by the end of this year, and some people are very worried about that. I'm not particularly. I think the next 3 years is actually still in the high end of the benefits that you can get. And so somewhere, hopefully you'll get to funds 3, 4, and 5, and this will all be in motion, and you can just kick back.
Yeah, right. I wish it were like that. As the manager of the fund, I have a lot of responsibility to the investors, which I take very seriously. To the municipalities, we may be doing a public-private partnership, and with the collection of consultants and attorneys we've assembled, it's really never a dull moment.
Mickey, what questions do you have for Michael?
Since you're out near the airport there, do you also have other incentives as part of a capital stack? Do you have new market tax credits, or do you have other designated areas?
No, we don't, Mick. But I have, I've seen some very large capital in New York doing the following. Because the cash flow of businesses that you create is subject to normal IRS regulations, they are buying tax credits beforehand, so to minimize that impact. We haven't done that yet, but I certainly know smart money's doing it.
Yeah, so what Michael's talking about is on a project of this scale, your long-term gain in the fund is where you're going to get your appreciation. But between now and 10 years, a lot of these projects are going to spin off ordinary income. And as that comes in, it's going to be taxed at the standard rates. And it basically is pulling money out of your project that you don't want to have pulled out if you don't have to. So you're going to be looking at the corporate structure or the business structure of your fund. You're going to be looking at all the different ways the revenue are coming out. And in this case, some of the groups are already looking at tax credits to offset that ordinary income to try to neutralize that, which will hold more money into the fund, so you'll have a higher appreciation over time. That's cool.
Well, there's appreciation and there's cash flow, right? So I had to think of the distinction between the two when I was structuring this, because they're two separate animals.
Right. Any other question, Mickey?
Yeah. Do you have, because this is removed from the urban core, I'm an urban core developer,
right?
And so seeing where you are located, do you have some affordable housing opportunities in here too? As it may lend to opportunity zones, kind of has a nice ring and complement to the potential of affordable housing. Have you considered any of that?
Yes, we prefer the term attainable housing.
Yeah, okay.
But yes.
Can you define that for the crowd here?
I have no idea. But it just has a better connotation. I mean, the builders are starting at a price point that's the lowest in the market, $275 for townhomes and $400 to $450 for single family. I'd beg you to find anywhere in the metro area where it's cheaper. So, but we are designating to a trust the ground where they can build this affordable housing, if you will, and part of our impact to give back. We'll have some alliances with hopefully people like Marriott and Gaylord around us to really help it. One thing I didn't talk about that I want to brush on is culture. We're trying to create a cultural district, if you will. What does that mean? What does that look like? It means concerts. It means gathering places. It means maybe some art and exhibitions, a place for painters to be, and try to create a sense of community. And we can make more money, perhaps not. This is a good argument. Just doing all building, but we want to create this ambiance that's necessary for social impact.
Yeah, and to help some of you understand, affordable housing is a particular term where the cost of the housing is matched to the income level of an average person. And so they have all these definitions of what is an average median income. And affordable housing is supposed to address or be affordable to the lowest people in the lowest income bracket. Attainable housing is sometimes referred to as the next bracket up, meaning that it's housing that costs just a little bit more, but it's outside the definition that the federal government has established for the New Market program and other programs. Other people use it as a private funded mechanism where they're saying it's not a government subsidized program, it's all private money. And we're seeing a lot of projects coming forward now that are all private because the New Market tax credits aren't quite getting the job done of creating enough housing, particularly for people of lower income. And then another thing that is showing up a lot in the opportunity zones is a form of equity sharing, where you have investors coming in and putting up part of the cost of the house or part of the deposit or part of the payments over time, which reduces the cash flow demand upon somebody of a lower income. And then when the property is sold, they split the equity value of that. And there are all kinds of challenges and pushbacks on a three-party deal because where you split the ownership, it runs contrary to most of the government programs.
Sounds like tenants in common.
Yeah, it gets to that point of being more like instead of owning your own condo, you have an ownership interest in the entirety of the building. And there are some advantages and disadvantages to that approach. One of the, yeah.
How is the investor basis determined in your fund?
Well,
how will it be determined?
This is something I think I understand. Damien's saying, please say the right thing. But the beauty of this program is if this may be hyperbole, inherited that property, had a zero basis in it, and I brought an investor in for $1, and that value grew to be $100, you have a step up in basis after you pay your tax on your dollar, that's capital gain. So your basis is the same as mine. Does that answer your question?
If you're going to be selling off lots to builders,
right?
What do they have a basis?
Well, because that sales price, taking something from a price per acre to a price per square foot, if you will, or a dwelling unit, has a mark-to-market value. So that's normally where
Would be determined upon sale.
That's right.
Okay, not after 10 years.
No, but again, part of this first offering, we're buying houses that are being built along, and we'll keep those as rentals to further get us to 10 years in the first offering. Some of those same house areas that we're developing, we're contracting with the builders to buy the houses. Everybody looks at me with a blank stare. No? You guys get it? Yeah. Okay. Do you get it, Alex, what I'm saying?
I get it.
Yeah. In 2008 to 18, the metro area has shown a 10% year-over-year return on metro housing. And that was through the darkest period, I hope we don't go through again, of a recession. So it's a good bet.
This has been one of the questions I've seen that developers are used to, put in the improvement, buy the land, put in the improvements, flip the property, and then start over again somewhere. And then here, with the Opportunity Zone tax incentives, there is more of a, I'll build it and hold that property and rent or lease it out over time. And then in order to cash everybody out after 10 years or whenever it makes sense, you just either do another capital raise and buy out your original investors or buy them down or do something to create your exits. Mm-hmm. But it's causing people to stretch their horizons on how they're doing deals over what is a more common method.
Mm-hmm. And right now the fact of the market is there's 48% of the adult population that rents and the other 52% buy. And what that tells me is there's a lot of people that would like to buy, but they just haven't found the ability to do so yet. So that demand for single family or whole ownership, if you will, is not going away. The question was, I believe what I heard you say is, once the land is developed and sold off and the houses are built, how are those two different sales or two different asset classes accounted for? Is that what you're saying?
So the question, Well, you're looking at the difference between the fund and the business into which the fund invested. So the fund has made a single investment in a business, and that business is going to stay there for the full 10 years.
So,
Okay.
All right, we're looking at it as a QOZ business, not a QOZ property. Okay.
I think that there's at least three legs on this stool. That's different than real estate development. You have QOZ property that's certified, designated by the feds, and then you have to have a fund. Then you have to. That's a whole nother kind of intricate qualification, but simple. You self-certify on your tax return. And the third is you have to invest in a QOZ business. 90-10 anyway.
And what we've seen is that the rules end up being very tight if you go directly from a fund into a piece of real estate, because you've got certain time frames and other things there where if you move the money from a fund into a business, you've got a longer period of runway to invest the money. You can roll properties over because it's within the framework of the business, and so you've got more options at that point. When we initially started talking about opportunity zones last year, there was a lot of talk about a single investment directly from a fund into a single piece of property that was going to be cashed out after 10 years. And in practice, I'm not seeing anybody really doing that.
Yeah, that's
Let me get that, and then you can follow up with that. 1031s are, in my way of thinking, I've been involved with many 1031 exchanges. This is so much better because you don't have the like-kind issue to deal with, and you can invest into a qualified opportunity zone either through a 1031 or 1231, or maybe other 31 something, I don't know. But those are the two I know about. I also know we've been contacted by cryptocurrency gain holders and all sorts of different gains that I think it's all fair bait, isn't it, as far as I know?
You will reach a point in the road where you're either going to do a 1031 or you're going to do an opportunity zone investment. We've actually talked to some people who have a long-term estate planning process where they're going to continue to buy 1031 properties and then roll that into their estate. And from a tax standpoint, we couldn't see any reason for them to change their strategy because it was going to give them the best long-term way of passing money down to their children and so forth. Where if you're trying to do something more aggressive, I think that opportunity zones has, as Michael described it, several advantages over a 1031 because of you don't have to reinvest everything, you don't have to have the like kind, and you also, I'm not sure on the whole period on 1031, but as I understand it right now, both short-term and long-term capital gains qualify for investment into an opportunity zone fund.
Right.
So you don't have to hold it for a year to get into this program. And a lot of people are asking me questions like, how can I take some ordinary income and bury it into a piece of property and then flip it to create a capital gain so that I can then roll that over into an opportunity zone where I can start getting the tax benefits. And these are the kinds of questions that are now coming in waves of how do I do this or how do I do that or how do I stack up, as Michael was talking about, you roll out of one type of a fund into a second fund and you're carrying your capital gains over. So you may be changing the time clock, but you're still pushing all your capital gains down the road.
And also with the 1031 exchange, the hardest part about that in the real estate business is in a hot market like Fort Collins or Denver is you have 45 days to identify a property. Your property, your ideal property doesn't exist in 45 days. You either have to go find and make something, convince somebody to sell something to you,
Bad investment.
or make a bad investment, which usually it's make a bad investment. And so with the Opportunity Zone, you still have that 180 days like you do with a 1031 exchange. You can invest 179 days. You can put in an Opportunity Zone fund. Then the Opportunity Zone fund, which can invest in multiple projects, has another 180 days to invest that amount of money. So you've kind of doubled the length of time that you have to really find a better project or a better property by using an opportunity zone.
Michael, the Gravitas fund is what we would call a dedicated fund, meaning that it's your fund. It's not an open public fund. It's one you created for your own use, for your own project. Would that be correct?
Well, partially. It's not an open or closed fund. We offer 3 levels of investment in the real estate, and gain would be probably the largest category. Any gain can come into the project, qualified gain, and thirdly, crowdfunding. So you can invest ordinary income into our fund. You're not going to get the tax benefits. You're not going to get anything else, but you probably get a great return on investment. So we tried to be as open and inclusive as we could.
So in the crowdfunding, is that a 506C offering for accredited own? It's a Reg A Plus offering? Okay. Yeah, so it's interesting because these mechanisms allow you to publish the fact you're looking for money, something you couldn't done just a few years ago. It had to either be a private offering or you had to go through a full public registration. And with the new crowdfunding laws, you have several different choices where you can publicize the fact you're raising money, which creates a better opportunity to match up with people who are looking for what you're doing.
And normally wouldn't have the opportunity.
Right. Right. Correct. Correct.
Yes, sir.
What role, if any, does solar and alternative energy play in your development, and maybe if we can get more credits in the future for that?
Are you in the solar business?
No.
Okay.
He loves it, though.
Okay. Your question was, what role does solar and alternative energy have to play? We are inundated with guys that are qualified from alternative energy sources in San Diego that have done what they say. I haven't verified any of this, but they want to come to Denver and have an alternative grid as one of the things they want to do. We're talking to some friends that are equipping brand new houses for smart everything, and we certainly want to do that. But importantly, we want to be, a project of this size, you want to have an alternative power source if things do go badly, and things do shut down. And also we want to be compatible with LEEDs and green development.
Does anyone know of Real Good Solar Energy? They make solar shingles here in Denver. Are they headquartered here in Denver? They're made in China.
Raven Brick?
Sorry?
Raven Brick? They're a solar, if you want to call it a thin film company out of Boulder. They're one of a number of different groups that are working on different coatings or different PV that's applied to a surface or a building material. And someday they'll get those good enough that your house won't look any different, but it's got a complete solar power generator over it.
It's completely off the subject, but there's a company out of Denver, Real Good Solar, that has I'm having a mind blank. An agreement with 3M to sell their technology in these roof shingles. And them and Tesla are the only companies that are shooting through the market in the United States. Tesla is selling very high-end roof shingles that look like terracotta tiles, whereas Real Good Solars are the asphalt shingle tiles, and they already have over $100 million in orders. They're just starting to get them into the country. They have UL approval, and RGSC is the stock symbol.
Yeah, and so...
Are you the broker dealer?
Yeah. No, but we're going to talk about this a little bit at the program, our next Opportunity Zones Meetup. We're going to talk about becoming more competitive from one project to another. And one of the common topics that comes up in that discussion is, why don't you put solar on everything? The technology is there now. You have the ability to lay the cost of the solar off on a third party, so you don't have to take it out of your budget. It may represent a new revenue source or new tax credits or something else. And so there's ways of starting to stack those up. I don't know if you've looked at the Colorado PACE program. Are you familiar with that, or have you looked at that?
No.
Okay. Certain counties in Colorado will allow you to upgrade your environmental standard for your building beyond, say, stock. And that upgrade can be financed by a third party, and then it's paid back out of property taxes rather than by the property owner. And in those counties that have stepped into this program, I think 22 of the 65 counties have done that. It gives you another way to either, particularly in retrofitting an old building, to go in and add this in there and lay it off in a different structure as far as paybacks. Banks are typically treating that money that's coming in the form of a loan because it's paid out of the property tax like it's an equity investment, so it doesn't change your down payment requirements. But these are things that are being looked at, and then Michael was asking me earlier whether or not is our state going to create a equivalent of the federal tax waiver on these types of things, or some states are talking about putting in matching money or seed money. Our 2019 legislative session is in order right now, and there's been some, I'll call it rumblings about what might come out of this session. So we may still see before May some things at the state level that will complement or match with the federal money to make this even more attractive.
Do you want to say something? No, go ahead. My vision, which I really haven't laid out here, is I'm around city planning departments and people in the cities that talk about a vision, and they want clean tech, they want employment base, and they want no cars. And all those things are like an oxymoron, and or a couple of them are. But what I see as a very, very unique principle that's not being marketed is that, again, this airport, and I travel a lot, it's got so much land around it, and it's got infrastructure from E470 and Pena and other major projects coming. There's Aurora Highlands, is 23,000 residents that are going to be built with all kinds of other things. But along that corridor of E470, my bet, because Colorado is the second largest state outside of California for technology jobs, that if there were some incentives offered just to get, as a metaphor, Google to put an office park for its employees going into the airport, that's really going to start a whole chain reaction of other things happening. And I also have a vision of, creating east-west mass transit, 48th, 56th, 64th, because that's where the only place in the city can grow. That's where all the growth will happen. And so, planning ahead for those things instead of in the rearview mirror would be really great.
The question that's been asked is whether the closeness to the airport and the noise associated with usual takeoff and landing of airplanes is going to be an issue.
Okay, so I appreciate your question. I have about 4 different bullet points to tell you about. One, I helped fund or contributed towards a noise contour study. Remember, because I built another project out here in 2000. City council members in Aurora, city mayor lives in High Point, even closer to the airport. You've got quieter engines now in airplanes. The part that we're flying over, that planes fly over, doesn't go over this property. It's outside of the restricted area where they can fly over. So I kind of laughed to myself about all this, because really, how many airports in the world have you flown into where there are not residential components close to an airport? I mean, name one. But anyway, we're not in that noise contour thing.
The question is whether or not this project has affordable housing designed into it, and I believe Michael's answer was no. But it is designed to provide housing that is I will say it's not priced completely out of the market, it's at a low end. And there's some land you've got set aside that you particularly have set aside in a way to enable builders to build lower priced housing.
We're not going to make any profit. They're going to strip it away. But let me tell you why this is a pet peeve of mine. I've sat around city planning offices, them talking about affordable housing. I've sat there with the biggest builders in the country, and we go, okay, we'll do all this at cost. We'll not make any profit. But city, we want you to give up your fees on your water and sewer taps. They look back like you're crazy and said, no, this won't happen. So that's where the real problem is in the affordable housing game. It's with the cities. Until they're made accountable for that, they're just hypocrites. So I feel pretty strongly about this.
We noticed.
Yeah, I've served on 30 boards and commissions in my life, and most of them affordable housing related. And it's really only the municipalities can reach deep into the affordable housing realm of 60% of area median income or below. And the potential for projects like this, when you're talking about $275 for a house, well, that's attainable. I mean, that's an 80% affordability price range, basically, for the Denver area. So that's achievable, and he can still make money and do it again. But only housing authorities who are primarily a subcontractor for the city. City of Fort Collins, for instance, they have, I think 3,900 units. They're the largest landlord in the city of Fort Collins. The city of Fort Collins Housing Authority is, and everything they do gets approved through the city council. So it's still a government's role in our community, at least, to try to create some affordability in the community. But the private sector, it's very difficult to do because we have obligations to profit. But now in a state like Colorado, and in a time like we are now, this opportunity zone momentum is a nice game changer. And we can think long term. We can, it's not for the short term investor necessarily. We could figure out some better strategies that everybody makes money, everybody makes a social impact they would love to see, and everybody makes a solid investment into projects that they want to see happen in Colorado. So you're in a good...
Yeah, I would like to make one clear distinction, is that almost all affordable housing is rented properties, meaning that the homeowners are not developing any wealth by having an ownership stake in those particular buildings. And all the studies out of the Harvard group and other places show that home ownership is one of the keys to wealth building generally across the United States. And so more affordable housing without an equity wealth building mechanism tied to that isn't necessarily improving these communities. It's kind of kicking the can down the road without solving that particular problem.
Yeah, and if you don't mind me saying, because some architect friends of mine out of Boulder have done some pretty cool projects, and if you want to promote attainable housing and employee housing, they've done a Poplar project in Boulder on Poplar Street. Very cool project. The land's in a land trust, and the people really just invested in the houses, and that's some cool creativity that went on. And then in Wellington neighborhood in Breckenridge, where it's very difficult to find attainable housing for employees up there, but again, they came up with a very creative way. And if you go to poplarhouse.com, it has all the deed restrictions, everything that you need to do. In the Wellington one, they can build equity. So it's a very cool approach to creating attainable housing in a smaller scale. The millennials, I have 3 millennial kids at home. Well, they're not at home, but they've affected me in a lot of ways in that I got to think differently. Where they're not interested in prairie castles, they're interested in little tiny 800 square foot homes, if that. I can't get them out of their Honda Elements. They keep traveling all over the country like they're RVs. So it's a very cool, life-changing moment that we're experiencing here in this country, because young kids have a little different priorities. So we have to think in the development realm differently to how to accommodate them and where we fit into it.
Yes. So the question is, can you invest non-capital gains into a project that is an opportunity zone? And you can. but you'll never get any of the tax benefits that are provided for by the legislation. So as Michael's describing, he's got some money coming in. Clearly it's capital gain rollovers. It's going to meet all the requirements, and if he holds it for 10 years, there'll be a waiver of the gain on that. At the same time, he has another fund, a complementary form of investment that's putting in just regular money. It's not a capital gain rollover, and it can still appreciate in value, but it'll be taxable whenever the exit occurs.
Why is that? To me, it seems like it would be more advantageous to the government to put already taxed money into a fund than.
Well, they are. If you're, you want to answer?
No, I don't try to explain the government. So the question is why won't the government also recognize basically non-capital gain money being invested into an opportunity zone? And there's a lot of good questions there about, I don't know. Because again, the primary purpose was to drive money into a distressed economic area. You shouldn't really care what color or source or type of money it is, if that's your primary goal. They selected out the capital gain rollover because I think it was an easier, greater incentive. They thought they would get a greater impact by doing that. We might see legislation in the future that opens the doors to non-capital gains being invested in, but at the moment, I haven't heard anybody talking about it.
It's,
I'd add one thing. The reason the government is $6.1 billion some dollars of unused capital gain on idle. And these areas are not areas that they've been typically looking to invest in. So by creating this incentive, the government was trying to get that money into play in these areas that don't meet the census or that meet the censuses in basically underutilized areas. So that's a real driver behind the senators that put that thing together.
Well, and think of it this way. Some people had investments where they pretty much put it on the shelf. It would sit there potentially forever, and it's not having any economic impact. So say you had a $10 million of General Motors stock, and it's all capital gains. If it just sits there in the stock, it's not having any economic impact in the community. So I think that the comment there was that they're trying to get people from, to put their money to work, to move it from a passive status to an active status by pushing it into these communities.
I think there's a clever way here to do this also. Correct me if I'm wrong, but if you in fact had invested ordinary income, if somebody would let you into a fund other than gain, wouldn't you in fact in a year create capital gain if you sold that asset and then be able to invest into other OZ funds, right?
Yeah, that's what we're looking at with more of the, I would call it sophisticated or complicated, overly complicated models, is if you have ordinary income or even if you have capital gains income, you may want to roll it over in a fashion where you're going to then put it into a second fund as a capital gain. So you may not get the first year of it, but you can still put it in for the full 10 years. It becomes an 11-year project instead of a 10-year project.
Yeah, and another way to look at if you have ordinary income that you want to find a place to invest in and you're worried about not getting that capital gain credit, look at it differently. The 70% of the 8,700 census tracts identified across the country are urban. And there's two types of real estate developers. There's urban developers and there's rural developer type stuff. Not a lot of rural activity happens out in the county areas, but in a lot of urban infill sites, this OZ has shined a light on some real investment potential sites that are just little remnants of pieces of property that you can take your ordinary income and invest in those. Assemble a team if you need to, but you could do, if you want to make some capital gain, you get a little elbow grease going, and you can, and this, if it's designated as an opportunity zone, there's another several layers of potential incentives that are available for that site. So you do your homework and find areas that have real potential, that have newer infrastructure versus old infrastructure that you don't want to have to replace. But a little knowledge goes a long way, and you can just make new capital gain by being smart and shrewd using this OZ program.
And again, think of what Michael's doing in terms of staged funding. So take your non-capital gain money, buy a piece of property, get the necessary permits, get it all approved to put improvements or add new buildings to that, flip that to another company that is funded with Opportunity Zone money, and you're allowed to take a 20% interest in that new company. So I'm working with a gentleman in Fort Collins right now. He's had the property 3 years, and after looking at it, he figured rather than being the big dog in 80% of the company, he'd rather be the 20% of the company and have investors come in, because his net gain over 10 years is far larger by bringing in that additional money and developing the property out. So you only have to hold it long enough to count as a capital gain, short-term capital gain, before you can roll it into something. And as long as you stay under the 20% rule in the new entity, the second entity in stage 2, now, as I say, a 10-year project becomes an 11-year project, but you'll still get to the same result. I have not read the question is whether or not the 20% rule is referred to in the regulations that are currently pending, and there's been a number of papers who have interpreted that.
Not the pending regulations, the current regulation.
The current regulations are not final yet.
Isn't 26 U.S. Code 1400Z-2 special rules for capital gains invested?
Yeah.
That's referring to the law, not the Opportunity Zone regulations that the IRS is currently working on. So, but yeah, the current rule is you can roll over as long as you don't end up with more than 20%. And there's reasons behind that, but that becomes a little more arcane to explain, but they don't want you basically rolling over your own property within your own project. But back to the question that was asked earlier, if it's all in an opportunity zone and it's bringing other dollars into the community, you know, what's the there? So, but yeah, we've seen a number of people who are looking at that particular issue where they bought the property before 2018 and now they're trying to figure out what to do with it. They want to stay in the property, but they don't necessarily need to be the majority owner.
Right, so.
I have another question.
Oh, come.
Okay. This will be the last question of the night, so we can wrap up. Go ahead.
So, Michael, in your fund, the client would be buying into a business. How is their portion or share of that business valued after 10 years?
$100,000 invested in today's dollars into a project that's successful or a business. That's the question, right?
Into your fund.
Into my fund.
Yeah, I think the question, Michael, is that at the end of 10 years, you're asking how do I know what money I'm going to make out of my investment?
Right.
Okay.
When is it, and when will it be sold? When can your investor take advantage of the tax laws, the OZ tax laws?
Well, you're going after 10 years, taking advantage of the tax laws means you don't sell it, because it runs through 2047, and if you don't sell it 10 years or after. But in answer to your question, I think I'm trying to understand. You have we have reporting requirements quarterly that we're going to, like a stock, we're going to let you know what the current situation market value is, how many sales have occurred, what the sales prices are, and then there'll be financial statements sent out, so you can track with us along the same time. If you are one investor, I'm glad you're asking this question, Alex, because we're talking about death and taxes. And as a lot of people say, they want to be locked down with their money for 10 years to take advantage. A lot of things happen in life. You need your money. Yeah, or you it's not in a KEO or an IRA or self-directed. So what can you do? That's a whole other question. But I think what this prompts us to do is we will liquidate those people out at the stepped-up basis if we choose to own that business, which I'd like to think we would for a much longer period. Those people that want out, they get out at the new stepped-up basis based on an appraisal.
Yeah, so what we're seeing people do is they'll plan out 10 years, and then if they're very flexible, they'll have a mechanism that will sell part of the stock of the company, which can be used to buy you out. So the fund is holding 80% of this business, and you're holding essentially stock in that business through the fund. So if you want to get out after 10 years and everybody else wants to hang in for another 10 or 15 years, you can do a private sale of your
Or we can buy it back from.
or it can be bought back, or you can create liquidation points to start retiring it, in pieces over time. But it's a good question from an investor standpoint. Before you go talk to someone like Michael, you want to go ask that question. Get out, what are my choices on when I get out? If I have an emergency, is there a way to get out or not, or am I stuck? Or if I want to get out of 10, or if I want to stay on the longer time period, and there's, how does that work? But you're essentially holding stock in a company. It can be appraised, the market value can be set by all the different mechanisms that are already out there. And then it's either a private sale or of your units in the fund that are holding indirectly the units in the business. So that can be done.
So I think what I heard, the answer to my question is, it's the increased value of the business.
Yes.
Yeah, hopefully
A
increased.
rising, it's got to be a good investment. If it's a bad investment, it's a bad asset.
Okay, well, thank you.
I got
Yeah,
a
go
little
ahead.
more to that, but it's all because you're buying stock, a percentage of the fund, as I understand it.
Yes.
Then you're also building equity up in the asset if it's a piece of property. And even though you won't take, you can take interest annually and as ordinary income, so you can continue in your 10-year, stage. You're not putting money away and never touching it again for 10 years. There are mechanisms that allow you to take it as I understand it, as some ordinary income.
Well, if your property is generating income, so say you build an apartment complex and you got rents coming in, those rents are creating cash flow. They'll be taxed at ordinary rates. So you may have enough cash flow from this investment. You don't have to sell the underlying asset. You don't have to sell the apartment complex in order to get some money back. If you need all of your money back, then you've got to have one of these grander exit provisions in place in order to make that happen. So let's do this. Let's call it a night. Thank you all very much. And thank you for coming to tonight's Opportunity Zones Meetup.
Thank you.